Nobody touches her! Adrian Kingsley's furious command thundered across the grand ballroom, silencing more than 300 mafia leaders before the echo had even faded. The richest crime lords in North America, Europe, and Asia watched in stunned disbelief as dozens of heavily armed Kingsley capos tackled billionaire Ethan Blackwood, only seconds after he had dropped to one knee in front of Olive Bennett, the Mafia Boss's cheerful, plump executive assistant, and asked her to marry him. Security teams reached for their weapons. Bodyguards formed defensive circles. Rival mafia families prepared for bloodshed. Olive stood frozen, her heart pounding as she stared from the horrified billionaire to her enraged employer. "What is happening?" she whispered. She had spent 6 years organizing Adrian Kingsley's empire, solving impossible crises before anyone realized they existed, yet nothing in her meticulous schedules had prepared her for this catastrophe. Why would America's most feared mafia boss look ready to start an international war over her? The answer arrived only moments later. Still kneeling despite the guns pointed at his head, Ethan calmly removed a confidential financial ledger from inside his jacket. "I believe Miss Bennett deserves to know the truth." He opened the ledger for everyone to see. Every payment was carefully documented. Every recipient was listed. Every signature verified. Nearly $8 million had been secretly distributed over the previous 2 years to influential businessmen, entrepreneurs, politicians, celebrities, and heirs, all for exactly one purpose: stay away from Olive Bennett. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that even breathing suddenly sounded dangerous. One by one, hundreds of eyes slowly turned toward Adrian Kingsley. For the first time in his legendary career, the most powerful mafia boss in America looked like a man who had just been caught committing the most ridiculous crime of his life. Every morning, long before executives, capos, or board members entered Kingsley Tower, Olive Bennett was already sitting behind her desk with a fresh notebook, 3 cups of coffee arranged in precise order, and an updated schedule that somehow accounted for every unpredictable disaster likely to happen before sunset. She wasn't supposed to know everything. Officially, she was only Adrian Kingsley's executive assistant. Unofficially, she knew where every shipment was crossing the ocean, which politicians required private meetings, which casinos were under investigation, which rival families were pretending to negotiate while secretly preparing betrayals. She even remembered passwords Adrian himself occasionally forgot. No one understood how. She simply smiled whenever someone asked, "I write things down." That answer never satisfied anyone. At precisely 7:30, Adrian Kingsley stepped out of the private elevator. Conversations immediately stopped. The atmosphere changed. Employees straightened their backs. Security guards instinctively stood taller. At 36, Adrian possessed the quiet authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly. His expression remained unreadable, and every calculated movement reminded people why he had become the youngest mafia boss ever to unite North America's largest criminal empire. Without looking at his calendar, he asked, "Meeting with the shipping directors." In conference room 3, the governor moved to 2:15 after his flight was delayed. The Zurich transfer, completed 6 minutes ago. Adrian gave a single nod, exactly as expected. He never questioned Olive's answers. They were never wrong. Across the reception area, 2 newly hired executives watched the exchange. "That's the famous assistant. I thought she'd look different." The second man lowered his voice. "I heard she's only here because she's loyal." His colleague laughed quietly. "Or because the boss feels sorry for her." Neither realized Olive had heard every word. She simply smiled. "Good morning." She handed each of them their meeting packets. "The presentation you're giving today still contains outdated financial projections. Page 12, also has the wrong acquisition date. Both executives stared. She was right. Again. Embarrassed, they hurried away without another joke. Olive returned to her desk, as though nothing had happened. This wasn't unusual. People underestimated her almost every day. Some looked at her soft figure before noticing her brilliant mind. Others assumed kindness meant weakness. Years ago, those assumptions had hurt. Now, they merely made her work easier. People revealed far more when they believed she wasn't paying attention. By mid-morning, controlled chaos swept through the headquarters. A shipment bound for Italy had disappeared from satellite tracking. A luxury hotel chain reported an unexpected labor strike. One of the syndicate's private banks detected suspicious transfers. Executives rushed through the corridors, carrying tablets and confidential folders. Voices rose. Phones rang non-stop. Olive quietly walked from office to office. She redirected a cargo vessel before customs intervened. She contacted the labor union representative everyone else had forgotten existed. She discovered that the suspicious banking activity resulted from duplicated authorization codes rather than external theft. Within 40 minutes, every crisis had disappeared. Most employees congratulated each other. Few noticed who had actually solved everything. Olive preferred it that way. Near noon, Adrian entered the executive conference room for negotiations with several wealthy investors. Olive remained beside the wall, silently taking notes. Halfway through the meeting, one of the younger investors leaned toward her with a charming smile. "Miss Bennett." She looked up politely. "Yes? I've seen you coordinating this company for months." He grinned confidently. "Perhaps, after work, you'd let me buy you dinner." Before Olive could answer, Adrian closed the presentation folder with enough force to echo across the room. "We're finished." Everyone blinked. One executive frowned. "But boss, we're only halfway through the contract. We'll continue tomorrow." His icy gaze shifted briefly toward the investor. "You have another meeting." The man looked confused. "I do. You do now." Within 30 seconds, security escorts politely guided every guest from the room. The investors exchanged bewildered glances all the way to the elevators. As the doors closed, one whispered, "Did I offend him?" Another shrugged. "I only invited his assistant to dinner." No one had an answer. Inside the conference room, Olive gathered the documents. "You cancelled a $30 million negotiation." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks without meeting her eyes. They weren't prepared. They seemed prepared. They weren't. Olive studied him for a second before deciding not to argue. Instead, she handed him another folder. "You skipped lunch yesterday." "I know." "You skipped breakfast today." "I'm aware." "I scheduled 20 minutes at 1 o'clock. I'll probably cancel it." "You won't." He raised an eyebrow. "I already ordered your favorite pasta." A rare pause followed. "Fine." The corner of Olive's mouth lifted slightly. 1 point for her. From outside the office, 2 veteran capos watched the exchange through the partially open door. Marco chuckled. "Our boss obeys exactly one person." His partner snorted. "And she doesn't even realize it." Another capo joined them, carrying a stack of reports. Yesterday, he rejected a movie star. Last week, he scared off a senator. Today, he cancelled a $30 million meeting because some banker smiled at Miss Bennett. The 3 men exchanged knowing looks. One finally whispered the sentence everyone inside the syndicate secretly believed. "The boss isn't protecting the company. He's protecting his heart." Unfortunately, the only 2 people who hadn't figured that out yet were Adrian Kingsley and Olive Bennett. 3 days later, the Kingsley Syndicate hosted what financial magazines publicly called the North American Strategic Investment Summit. Everyone inside the ballroom knew its real purpose. It was where mafia empires negotiated billion-dollar alliances behind polished smiles and crystal chandeliers. Representatives from 32 international organizations filled the hall. Shipping magnates, casino owners, private bankers, royal family advisors, technology billionaires, political power brokers. Every guest had survived decades in worlds where one careless sentence could cost an empire. Even among such dangerous people, one name commanded absolute respect: Adrian Kingsley. As the host, he stood confidently at the center of the grand stage, delivering a calm presentation about expanding international shipping routes across Europe and Asia. Behind him, giant digital screens displayed market projections. Around him, hundreds listened in complete silence. Near the edge of the stage, Olive moved quietly through the crowd with her tablet. She checked schedules, answered whispered questions, redirected staff before problems could arise. To most guests, she appeared to be nothing more than another diligent assistant, which was exactly why nobody noticed that every speaker, every seating arrangement, every signed contract, and every security protocol had been organized by her. When Adrian concluded his presentation, thunderous applause echoed throughout the ballroom. 10 minutes before the next session, Olive reminded him softly. He nodded. "I'll remain here." She smiled. "I know." Turning away, she headed toward the hospitality area to verify several last-minute changes. She never noticed a tall man in a midnight blue suit watching her from across the room. Ethan Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Global Holdings, one of Europe's youngest billionaires. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't looking at Adrian. He was watching Olive. For months, Ethan had quietly investigated the Kingsley syndicate before proposing a strategic partnership. During that investigation, he had discovered something unexpected. Every major crisis within the organization somehow disappeared after passing through one assistant's hands. The more he learned, the more fascinated he became. Today, he intended to discover whether the woman behind the empire was as extraordinary as the reports suggested. As Olive approached the refreshment table, Ethan stepped forward with an easy smile. "Miss Bennett?" She looked up politely. "Yes? I'm Ethan Blackwood. I know who you are. I was hoping you'd spare 5 minutes for coffee after today's conference." Olive blinked. "Business coffee?" He laughed. "I was hoping for real coffee." Before she could answer, Adrian's eyes lifted from across the ballroom. Their gazes met. Then, he noticed Ethan, standing far too close, smiling far too warmly. Something inside Adrian tightened instantly. Marco, standing nearby, quietly sighed. Oh no. Another capo followed Adrian's line of sight. Our boss saw it. Several security officers subtly exchanged nervous looks. They had witnessed this expression before. It rarely ended peacefully. Oblivious to the invisible storm forming around them, Ethan continued. "I've met ministers, CEOs, and royal advisors. But everyone keeps telling me the real genius behind this empire is you." Olive laughed awkwardly. "That's an exaggeration. I don't think it is." For the first time in years, someone was openly appreciating her work instead of overlooking it. She wasn't sure how to respond. Then Ethan reached into his jacket. The nearby guards immediately tensed. Instead of a document, he removed a small velvet box. Olive stared. "Mr. Blackwood?" His voice carried calmly across the suddenly silent ballroom. "I know this is unconventional, but extraordinary women deserve extraordinary honesty." One knee touched the marble floor. Gasps spread through the audience. The velvet box opened. Inside rested a breathtaking diamond ring. Olive Bennett. "I know we barely know each other, but I've spent months learning about the woman everyone else failed to see. I've never admired anyone more. So, would you marry me?" Time stopped. Forks froze halfway to crystal plates. Conversations died instantly. Even the musicians stopped playing. Olive's face turned scarlet. I... She couldn't even finish a sentence. Her brain refused to process what was happening. Across the ballroom, Adrian Kingsley completely lost control. Nobody touches her. The roar exploded through the hall like artillery fire. Before anyone understood what was happening, dozens of Kingsley capos tackled Ethan to the ground. Bodyguards surrounded the stage. Security teams drew their weapons. Representatives from rival mafia families instinctively reached for theirs. Several foreign delegates ducked beneath banquet tables. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted that a war had started. Within seconds, the most prestigious business summit in the country had become absolute chaos. Olive rushed forward in panic. Stop! Please stop! Nobody's attacking anyone. Adrian ignored her completely. His eyes remained locked on Ethan. You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself. Ethan, remarkably calm, despite half a dozen rifles pointed at him, slowly raised one hand. I'm not your enemy. No. No. With deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket once more. Several capos cocked their weapons. Instead of another ring, he produced a thick, leather-bound ledger. I came prepared. He handed it toward the nearest capo. This belongs to your boss. Adrian frowned. What is this? A complete financial audit. The strangest one my investigators have ever conducted. The ballroom grew quiet again. Adrian opened the first page. His expression remained unreadable. Then, he turned another page. And another. His jaw tightened. Olive noticed it immediately. Something was terribly wrong. What is it? She asked softly. Ethan answered before Adrian could. For nearly 2 years, my investigators discovered a hidden payment network. He looked around the ballroom. Thousands of transactions. Hundreds of recipients. Nearly $8 million. Murmurs spread across the audience. 8 million? For what? Ethan smiled almost apologetically. At first, we believed it was money laundering. We were wrong. He turned the ledger so everyone nearby could see. Each page listed another businessman, another executive, another influential bachelor. Beside every name, one handwritten instruction: do not pursue Olive Bennett. Compensate generously. Signed anonymously. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then one elderly mafia don burst into laughter. Another followed. Soon, the entire ballroom erupted. Veteran capos laughed until tears formed in their eyes. Even rival mafia bosses struggled to remain composed. One billionaire wiped his glasses. Are you telling me someone spent $8 million just to keep men away from one assistant? Ethan nodded. Yes. Every face slowly turned toward Adrian Kingsley. The feared Mafia Boss of North America suddenly looked far less intimidating, and far more like a man caught hiding an impossibly embarrassing secret. Olive stared at him in complete disbelief. Adrian? The laughter refused to die. Some mafia dons leaned against the banquet tables, trying to catch their breath. A Russian shipping magnate slapped his American counterpart on the shoulder. I've seen men start wars over oil. I've seen men destroy governments. But spending $8 million to eliminate your romantic competition? He laughed again. That's a new one. Even Adrian's own capos avoided making eye contact with him. Not because they feared him. Because they knew that if they looked at his face, they would burst out laughing too. Olive, however, wasn't laughing. She stood perfectly still. The ledger remained open in Adrian's hands. Page after page, payment after payment, date after date. Every transaction was painfully real. She looked up slowly. Tell me this isn't true. For the first time in years, Adrian Kingsley had no immediate answer. He had negotiated with presidents, outsmarted rival empires, faced assassination attempts without changing his expression. Yet one simple question from Olive left him completely defenseless. It isn't exactly what it looks like. The ballroom exploded with laughter again. Marco quietly covered his face. Boss, please stop talking. You're making it worse. Olive folded her arms. Then explain. Adrian inhaled slowly. I never paid anyone to hurt anyone. No one was threatened. No one was forced. I simply... He stopped. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on him, encouraged them to lose interest. Another wave of laughter swept across the room. One elderly capo whispered, "He actually admitted it." Olive blinked. "You encouraged them." Adrian cleared his throat. They received business opportunities, investments, consulting contracts, scholarships, luxury vacations. If they happened to become too busy to ask you out, that was their decision. Olive stared at him. So every man who suddenly cancelled our date, everyone who claimed he had accepted a job overseas, everyone who disappeared without explanation. Adrian remained silent. Her eyes widened. "No, it wasn't coincidence." She looked at Ethan. "When did you discover this?" He answered gently. "About 6 months ago. I didn't believe it at first. So I hired another investigative firm. They reached the same conclusion." He smiled apologetically. "I almost admired whoever planned it. It was absurdly sophisticated. One page listed a surgeon from Boston. Another listed a federal prosecutor, a famous athlete. 2 successful entrepreneurs, a best-selling author. Each story suddenly rushed back into Olive's memory. The doctor who had called the night before their first dinner. "I'm sorry, an incredible opportunity just came up." The architect who had accepted a mysterious contract in Dubai. The attorney who suddenly decided to move to London. The charming professor who cancelled because he had become engaged to someone he had met only 2 weeks earlier. At the time, she had blamed bad luck. Now, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She slowly looked back at Adrian. "You bought my entire dating life." His ears turned slightly red. "It sounds worse when you say it like that." She laughed once. Not because it was funny, because her brain refused to process how unbelievably ridiculous the truth had become. "You realize, this might be the strangest confession in Mafia history." "I do. You could have simply asked me to dinner." "I considered it." She raised an eyebrow. "When?" Several times. "And?" "You always looked busy." For a brief second, silence hung between them. Then Olive sighed. "I was busy. Scheduling your dinners." Several nearby executives quietly groaned. The irony was almost painful. Marco leaned toward another capo. "Our boss conquered 5 mafia families, but one calendar defeated him." The capo nodded. "Tragic." Laughter returned once again. Even Olive struggled not to smile. Yet beneath the humor, another emotion slowly emerged. Confusion. Because despite everything, she couldn't ignore one uncomfortable truth. No one had ever protected her this obsessively. No one had ever noticed every man who approached her. No one had ever cared enough to act so irrationally. She looked directly into Adrian's eyes. Why? The single word carried more weight than any accusation. Why spend millions? Why manipulate strangers? Why never tell her? Adrian's confident posture finally weakened. "I've spent my entire life controlling situations, negotiating risks, eliminating threats. When someone tried to take territory, I knew what to do. When someone betrayed the syndicate, I knew what to do. When politicians turned against me, I knew what to do." He paused. "But every time another man smiled at you, I completely forgot how to think." No one laughed this time. The honesty in his voice silenced the ballroom. I was afraid. Olive frowned. Afraid of what? That you'd choose someone better. The answer stunned everyone. America's most feared mafia boss. Afraid. Not of enemies. Not of prison. Not of death. But of rejection. Before Olive could respond, a sharp vibration interrupted the moment. Lucas Harrington glanced discreetly at the encrypted phone hidden beneath the conference table. One message. Operation Eclipse is ready. Transfer confirmed. Begin Phase 2. His expression remained perfectly calm. Inside, he smiled. For months, he had quietly stolen millions from the Kingsley Syndicate through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and manipulated investment reports. Olive had unknowingly corrected several accounting irregularities before they became dangerous. She was the only person capable of seeing patterns no software could detect, which meant she had become the only real threat to his plan. Today's public scandal between Adrian and Olive was perfect. While every executive laughed, while every capo discussed the proposal, while every guest focused on the boss's embarrassing secret, no one was watching the financial systems. Lucas casually excused himself. I need to make one phone call. No one questioned him. Outside the ballroom, he dialed a secure number. It's happening exactly as predicted. A distorted voice answered. And Miss Bennett. Lucas looked through the glass wall toward Olive. She was still speaking with Adrian. She's beginning to connect old patterns. Good. The voice became colder. She must never connect the new ones. Lucas ended the call, then calmly walked back into the ballroom, already planning how to remove the only woman capable of destroying everything he had built in secret. The laughter inside the ballroom lingered long after the summit resumed. Stories about Adrian Kingsley's spectacular loss of composure spread through the international delegates faster than any official announcement. Veteran mafia dons chuckled over expensive whiskey. Foreign investors teased Kingsley's executives. Even members of rival families secretly admitted they had never imagined the legendary mafia boss capable of something so embarrassingly human. Only Olive wasn't laughing anymore. The ledger Ethan had exposed refused to leave her thoughts. For years, she had believed every failed relationship was simply bad timing. Now she knew someone had been quietly rewriting her future. And somehow, that truth hurt almost as much as it confused her. Late that evening, Kingsley Tower finally began to empty. Most executives left after the summit. Security teams rotated shifts. Cleaning crews quietly entered the upper floors. Olive remained in her office. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside 3 computer monitors displaying financial reports from dozens of Kingsley subsidiaries. Normally she would have gone home hours ago. But something bothered her. A feeling she couldn't explain. Her eyes drifted across transaction summaries from the syndicate's private banking division. One number caught her attention. A transfer of $42.8 million. Perfectly authorized, perfectly documented, perfectly wrong. She frowned. The authorization code belonged to a shipping investment, but the receiving company specialized in medical equipment. That made no sense. She opened another report, then another, then another. Within minutes, a strange pattern slowly emerged. Every questionable transfer looked legitimate by itself. Every signature matched. Every approval existed. Every audit passed. Individually, nothing appeared suspicious. Together, the numbers formed a hidden trail. Someone had scattered tiny accounting inconsistencies across hundreds of companies. Too small for software. Too random for auditors. Too sophisticated for coincidence. Olive's heartbeat quickened. No, she whispered. This isn't bookkeeping. It's camouflage. She rapidly opened archived records dating back 18 months. The pattern expanded. Millions had disappeared. Not all at once. Hundreds of thousands here. Several million there. Tiny percentages hidden inside massive international transactions. Enough to remain invisible. Enough to build an enormous fortune. Without realizing it, she had stumbled onto the largest internal theft in Kingsley Syndicate history. Then she saw the final clue. Every fraudulent approval ultimately passed through one executive office, Chief Financial Officer, Lucas Harrington. Olive leaned back in disbelief. It can't be. Lucas had served Adrian for nearly 12 years. Brilliant, calm, trusted by everyone, including her. She immediately reached for her phone. Her finger hovered over Adrian's contact, then stopped. No, she needed proof first. If she accused the syndicate's chief financial officer without undeniable evidence, the consequences could destroy innocent people. She quietly copied the financial records onto an encrypted drive, then another, then uploaded backups to 3 separate secure servers. Just in case, she murmured. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. She looked up. Marco stood outside. The boss wants to know if you've gone home. She smiled. Almost. Marco noticed the dozens of financial reports covering her desk. Working again. I found something strange. His expression became serious. What kind of strange? I'm not ready to say. But if I'm right, she swallowed. Someone inside the syndicate is stealing from us. Marco's smile disappeared instantly. I'll get Adrian. No. She shook her head. Not yet. I need one more confirmation. Marco hesitated. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Still, he trusted Olive. Don't stay too late. I won't. As soon as he left, someone else picked up a phone. From a nearby security office, Lucas calmly ended the surveillance feed, then dialed another encrypted number. She found it. A pause. How much does she know? Enough. The voice on the other end became cold. Then tonight. Lucas looked through the camera system one last time. Olive was still alone. Perfect. 45 minutes later, Olive finally gathered the evidence into a single encrypted drive. She slipped it into her handbag, turned off the lights, locked her office. The executive floor felt unusually quiet. Almost. Too quiet. As she approached the private elevator, the hallway lights suddenly flickered. She stopped. Power failure. Impossible. Kingsley Tower had 4 independent backup systems. Before she could react, the emergency light switched on. Red. A sharp hiss echoed through the corridor. Smoke poured from the ventilation system. Fire suppression alarm. Automatic evacuation. Olive instinctively stepped backward. Then a cloth covered her mouth. A powerful arm locked around her shoulders. She tried to scream. Everything became blurry. The last thing she heard was an unfamiliar voice whispering, "Don't hurt her. The boss wants her alive." Darkness swallowed everything. 20 minutes later, Adrian finished a private negotiation with representatives from 3 European families. He glanced toward the conference entrance. Olive wasn't there. Strange. She never missed a schedule. He checked his watch. 10 minutes late. Highly unusual. He called her. No answer. Again. Straight to voicemail. A knot formed in his stomach. He walked quickly toward her office. Empty. Computer running. Chair pushed back. Handbag gone. Tea still warm. Marco arrived moments later. "I thought she was with you." Adrian looked around the room. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. His eyes landed on the computer monitor. One document remained open. Large red letters flashed across the screen. Unauthorized capital movement detected below it. One unfinished note. Lucas. Nothing else. Adrian's expression turned to ice. Seal the building. Marco didn't hesitate. Within seconds, emergency lockdown activated across Kingsley Tower. Steel security doors slammed shut. Private elevators stopped. Armed response teams flooded every entrance. No one entered. No one left. 5 minutes later, the security chief rushed into the office. "Boss?" CCTV from the executive floor disappeared for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough, Adrian replied quietly. Another capo entered. "We found her phone. Parking garage. Crushed." The room fell silent. Adrian slowly picked up the broken phone. The cracked screen reflected his face. His jaw tightened. His breathing slowed. Everyone nearby instinctively stepped backward. They knew this version of Adrian Kingsley. This wasn't the embarrassed man from the summit. This was the man who had destroyed entire mafia organizations for crossing one line. He spoke only once. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Find her." No shouting, no threats. Just 3 words. Every capo immediately ran. Helicopters lifted into the night. Private intelligence teams activated across 3 states. Ports closed. Airfields locked down. Safe houses raided. Informants disappeared into the streets. Within minutes, the entire Kingsley syndicate abandoned business, negotiations, and diplomacy. The largest mafia empire in North America had declared an unofficial war, not for territory, not for money, not for revenge, but for one woman. And somewhere beyond the city lights, Olive Bennett slowly opened her eyes inside a dark warehouse. Her hands were tied. Her encrypted drive was gone. A familiar pair of polished shoes echoed across the concrete floor. Lucas Harrington stepped into the light, smiling. The warehouse smelled of rust, diesel fuel, and seawater. Olive slowly regained consciousness. Her wrists were tied securely to a steel chair. A single industrial lamp hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across stacks of abandoned shipping containers. The encrypted drive was gone. Lucas Harrington stood only a few feet away, calmly polishing his glasses as though they were meeting for another routine financial review. "I'm glad you're awake," he said pleasantly. Olive stared at him. "So it really was you?" Lucas smiled. "I was hoping you'd figure it out." She shook her head. 12 years. You betrayed everyone. I improved everyone." He laughed softly. "Do you know how many billions this empire earns every year?" She remained silent. No organization this large ever notices a few missing percentages. You stole hundreds of millions. I redirected opportunity. You betrayed Adrian. Lucas's expression hardened. I built his fortune. I expanded his empire. I made impossible numbers possible. And what did I receive? Another annual bonus. He leaned closer. I deserved ownership. Olive looked directly into his eyes. No, you deserved trust. You chose greed. For the first time, Lucas's smile disappeared. You always were the only person who couldn't be fooled. He reached into his jacket and produced the encrypted drive. I almost admired you. Nobody else noticed. Not the auditors. Not federal investigators. Not private banks. Only you. Olive quietly examined the room. 2 armed guards. 1 locked exit. Old electrical panels. Shipping manifests stacked against the wall. A loading crane suspended overhead. She wasn't looking for a weapon. She was looking for information. Because information had always been her greatest weapon. "You won't leave here alive," Lucas said calmly. "I can't allow witnesses." Olive tilted her head. "If that were true, you would have killed me before I woke up." Lucas paused. She continued. "You need something." His silence confirmed it. "The backup files." You don't know where I sent them. Lucas sighed. You really are remarkable. Before he could continue, a phone vibrated inside his pocket. He answered immediately. What? The voice on the other end sounded panicked. Boss Kingsley found the offshore network. Lucas's face changed. Impossible. He froze every international transfer. Our accounts are collapsing. Lucas slowly lowered the phone. Olive smiled. I told you. I never keep only one copy. You uploaded everything. 3 encrypted servers. Automatic release. If anything happened to me, the evidence distributed itself. Lucas stared at her. For the first time, he looked afraid. Meanwhile, Kingsley Tower had transformed into a military command center. Dozens of giant screens covered the walls. Maps updated every second. Private satellites tracked vehicle movement. Helicopters scanned industrial districts. Every available capo waited for Adrian's orders. Marco approached cautiously. We've located one of Lucas's shell companies. Abandoned harbor district. Adrian was already walking. Prepare everyone. Another capo hesitated. Boss, we've scheduled the alliance treaty with the European families. If you leave now, the agreement may collapse. Adrian never slowed his pace. Cancel it. Silence. The treaty took 18 months to negotiate. I said, cancel it. But boss, Adrian turned. His eyes contained a level of fury none of them had witnessed in years. I can rebuild an alliance. I can rebuild an empire. I cannot rebuild Olive. No one argued again. Within 60 seconds, more than 200 armed Kingsley soldiers mobilized. Armored vehicles raced toward the harbor. Helicopters thundered overhead. The unofficial war had begun. Back inside the warehouse, Lucas ordered his guards to move Olive. They had barely untied her wrists. When every light suddenly went out, darkness. Then, the unmistakable sound of explosive charges. Boom! The main entrance collapsed inward. Floodlights blinded everyone inside. Smoke filled the warehouse. A voice echoed through the dust. Kingsley Syndicate, drop your weapons! Gunfire erupted. Lucas's guards returned fire. Bullets shattered containers. Metal screamed. Olive threw herself behind a steel crate as chaos consumed the building. Outside, Adrian led the assault himself. His soldiers advanced with ruthless precision. Within minutes, Lucas's hired mercenaries realized they weren't fighting ordinary security teams. They were facing the most feared Mafia army on the continent. One by one, they surrendered. Others fled. Several were captured before reaching the docks. Lucas ran. He sprinted toward the rear loading platform. Olive saw him first. He'll escape! Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen tablet from the floor. The warehouse's automated cargo system was still online. She connected to the control panel. Her fingers flew across the screen. 3 commands, 2 overrides, 1 emergency authorization. The overhead loading crane suddenly roared to life. Lucas looked upward. Too late. A massive shipping container slammed onto the dock directly in front of him, sealing the only escape route. He spun around, straight into Adrian. Neither man spoke. Lucas reached for a hidden pistol. Adrian disarmed him with a single movement. The weapon slid across the concrete. Seconds later, Marco and several capos forced Lucas to his knees. It's over. Lucas laughed bitterly. No, you still haven't won. Adrian remained silent. Lucas looked toward Olive. You think she saved your empire? She destroyed it. Every government agency will investigate after these records become public. Olive calmly stepped forward. No. I removed every operational secret. Lucas frowned. I only released evidence of your crimes. The syndicate survives. You don't. Lucas closed his eyes. He finally understood. She had protected the innocent, while exposing the guilty, exactly as she always did. Several weeks later, the investigations ended. Lucas Harrington's international financial network collapsed completely. Billions in stolen assets were recovered. Victims received compensation. Executives who had unknowingly participated were cleared. Victoria Ashcroft's manipulation also unraveled. Investigators discovered she had secretly supplied Lucas with internal gossip, hoping to drive Olive away from Adrian forever. Instead, she destroyed her own reputation. Every business partnership abandoned her. Every social invitation disappeared. The woman who had judged Olive by appearances lost everything that appearances had once given her. 1 month later, representatives from every major mafia family gathered once again. This time, not for business, but for celebration. The Kingsley Syndicate had survived its greatest internal betrayal. Adrian walked toward the center of the stage. Hundreds watched. Olive stood beside him, still wearing the same warm smile, still trying to avoid unnecessary attention. Adrian accepted a microphone. "I owe someone an apology." The ballroom became completely silent. For 2 years, I believed protecting someone meant controlling every possible risk. I was wrong. He turned toward Olive. "I never trusted you to make your own choices. I was so afraid of losing you that I never gave you the chance to choose me." He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. This time, no guards moved. No one shouted. No one reached for a weapon. Adrian opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple diamond ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing political. Just honest. "Olive Bennett, I cannot promise you an easy life. My world will always be dangerous. I will still make mistakes. But from this day forward, I promise I will never hide behind power when honesty is enough." He smiled nervously. The legendary Mafia Boss actually looked nervous. "So, will you choose me? Freely?" Tears gathered in Olive's eyes. She looked around the room. Hundreds of people waited, not because they feared Adrian, because they genuinely hoped for her answer. She laughed softly through her tears. "You know," he blinked, "it would have been much cheaper if you'd simply asked me out 2 years ago." The entire ballroom erupted with laughter. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck. "I've heard that before." "I know." Olive reached for his hand. "Yes." The applause was deafening. Veteran Mafia dons stood first, then every capo, then every executive. Even Ethan Blackwood smiled as he applauded. Later, he quietly approached Adrian. "No hard feelings." Adrian extended his hand. "No. You helped me become honest." The two men shook hands. Months later, the Bennett Opportunity Foundation officially opened its doors, created by Adrian Kingsley, directed by Olive Bennett. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships, career opportunities, and leadership training for overlooked employees, hard-working women, and talented people too often judged by appearances instead of ability. At the inauguration ceremony, a smiling reporter raised one final question. "Boss Kingsley, is it true you secretly spent nearly $8 million keeping men away from your assistant?" The audience burst into laughter. Adrian sighed dramatically. "Unfortunately." Olive squeezed his hand. "You realize that was the worst investment decision of your career." He smiled. "No. It became the best. The moment you said yes." Laughter echoed across the plaza. An elderly capo quietly whispered to the man beside him. "Our boss defeated 5 mafia empires, but nearly lost the love of his life because he didn't know how to say 3 simple words. Adrian kissed Olive gently on the forehead. She had never wanted wealth. She had never chased power. She had never demanded recognition. She simply remained kind, even when the world underestimated her. In the end, the greatest weakness of the most powerful mafia boss in America was never a rival family, never a government, never another billionaire. It was the extraordinary woman who quietly organized his empire and accidentally stole his heart.